Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Legends and Lore, the podcast where we dive headfirst into the strange, the eerie, and the downright unexplainable. I'm your host, David Culpepper, and as always, I'm here to guide you through another journey into the unknown. But, quick question before we start. Did anyone else hear a weird knock at their door earlier? Or is it just me? No. Okay, just checking. I always say doing this podcast doesn't spook me too much, but that every now and then something gets under my skin. And let me tell you, tonight's topic, it's the kind of story that makes you double check the locks on your doors and maybe leave a light on when you go to bed, because tonight we're talking about the Black-Eyed Kids. Now, if you've never heard of the Black-Eyed Kids, or BEKs as they're sometimes called, let me paint you a picture. Imagine this. It's a quiet evening at home. You're relaxing, maybe watching TV or scrolling through your phone, when there's a knock at the door. You open it to find two children standing there. They're pale, maybe a little awkward, and something about them just feels off. They ask to come in. Maybe it's to use your phone, or maybe they just say they need help. And then you notice their eyes, completely black. No whites, no pupils, just endless, inky blackness. The dread hits you like a punch to the chest. Your instincts scream, "Don't let them in!" But they keep asking calmly, insistently, as if they know you'll cave eventually. Over about the next hour or so, we're going to explore everything there is to know about the Black-Eyed Kids. We'll dive into terrifying eyewitness encounters, the origins of the legend, and the theories that try to explain who or what these kids might be. Are they vampires, demons, alien hybrids, or just the creepiest pranksters of all time? We'll also look at how stories like these thrive in the age of the internet and why they tap into some of our deepest fears. But before we dive in, let me ask you this. What would you do if you heard that knock on your door? Would you open it? Would you let them in? Or would you trust that little voice in the back of your mind telling you something's not right? I'll be honest, I'm firmly in the nope, not today camp, but hey, maybe you're braver than I am. Either way, one thing's for sure. The Black-Eyed Kids are a mystery that will make you think twice about answering that knock at night. So grab a blanket, turn the lights down low, unless you're like me and prefer a little extra illumination for this one, and let's get into it. Every great legend has its beginning, a single spark that ignites the fire. For the Black-Eyed Kids, and that spark came in 1996, when journalist Brian Bethel shared his chilling experience, a story that to this day remains one of the most well-known and unsettling encounters with the BEKs. Bethel's account didn't just introduce the world to the Black-Eyed Kids, it laid the foundation for a phenomenon that would thrive in the shadows of the internet and spread across the globe. Let's go back to 1996. Brian Bethel, a respected journalist from Abilene, Texas, was sitting in his car one evening in a parking lot near a movie theater. He was writing a check, remember those? When he noticed two boys approaching his vehicle. At first glance, nothing about them seemed particularly unusual. They looked to be around 9 or 10 years old, wearing hoodies and jeans. But as they got closer, Bethel felt an inexplicable sense of dread creeping over him. The boys knocked on his window, and when he rolled it down slightly, they asked for a ride. They said they needed to get home to grab money for the movie they wanted to see. Innocent enough, right? But Bethel couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that something was wrong. Their speech was oddly formal, almost robotic, and their insistence that he let them in felt unnatural. Then he saw their eyes, completely black. No whites, no pupils. Just two endless pools of darkness staring back at him. Bethel described the terror he felt as primal, like every instinct in his body was screaming at him to get out of there. He fumbled with his keys, made an excuse about not having time, and sped off, leaving the boys behind. When he glanced in his rearview mirror, they were gone. Just gone. Bethel later shared his experience on an early online forum, and the story took on a life of its own. It wasn't just another creepy anecdote, it was the beginning of the Black-Eyed Kids legend. Bethel's account resonated with people because it tapped into something universal, the fear of the unnatural lurking just beneath the surface of the ordinary. His detailed description of the children, their formal speech, their eerie persistence, and of course their black, soulless eyes, set the tone for every BEK story that would follow. And once the internet got hold of it, well, that's when things really took off. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the internet was a wild, untamed frontier, perfect for stories like this to thrive. Early forums like Usenet, paranormal chat rooms, and those oh-so-mysterious email chains were the breeding ground for modern urban legends. It didn't take long for Bethel's story to spread. People who had never heard of the Black-Eyed Kids suddenly found themselves sharing their own encounters, or wondering if the knock at their door last week might have been more than just the neighbor's kid. Let's be real, the internet has always been a magnet for the weird and the creepy. From Slender Man to Shadow People, these kinds of stories thrive in the digital age because they're so easy to share. And the Black-Eyed Kids fit perfectly into this ecosystem. They're just believable enough to make you wonder, just creepy enough to keep you up at night, and just vague enough to make every strange knock on the door a potential encounter. In a way, the Black-Eyed Kids are part of a much larger tradition of modern folklore. Think about it. Urban legends like the vanishing hitchhiker or the babysitter and the man upstairs have been around for decades, passed from person to person as cautionary tales. The internet just supercharged that process, giving stories like the BEKs a global stage. Suddenly, what might have been a local ghost story could reach millions of people with a single post. And because the BEK legend relies so much on our imagination, on the fear of the unknown, it's the perfect storm for digital storytelling. So, is it any wonder that the Black-Eyed Kids took off the way they did? They're mysterious, they're unsettling, and they're just vague enough to make you wonder if the knock on your door last night might have been something more. But where did these kids come from? Are they supernatural? Aliens? Something else entirely? That's where things get really interesting, and we'll dive into all the theories in just a bit. When it comes to the Black-Eyed Kids, and the most compelling and downright terrifying part of the legend is the sheer number of eyewitness accounts. These aren't just one-off stories whispered around a campfire. People from all over the world have reported encounters with these eerie, pale children, and the details are so consistent, it's hard to ignore. From quiet neighborhoods to isolated roads, from parked cars to front porches, the Black-Eyed Kids seem to appear wherever they please, leaving fear and confusion in their wake. One of the most chilling encounters comes from a man named Chris, who shared his story in a paranormal forum. It was late one evening, and Chris was sitting in his living room watching TV when he heard a knock at the door. Nothing unusual, right? But when he opened it, there were two kids standing on his porch, a boy and a girl, both around 10 years old. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothing, the kind you'd expect to see in a black and white photo from decades ago. The boy spoke first, his voice flat and monotone. "We need to come in," he said. "It's cold out here." Chris described an immediate sense of unease, like something primal inside him was screaming, Do not let them in. The children didn't move. They just stood there, staring at him, their faces pale and emotionless. When Chris asked why they needed to come in, the boy replied, "We need to use your phone." It wasn't a request, it was a statement, almost robotic in its delivery. And then Chris noticed their eyes, completely black. No whites, no pupils, just endless dark voids staring back at him. He slammed the door shut and locked it, his hands shaking. When he finally gathered the courage to peek through the peephole, they were gone, just like that. Another account comes from a woman named Lisa, who was driving late at night on a deserted country road. She spotted a young boy standing on the shoulder, waving her down. Concerned, she slowed her car and rolled down the window. The boy, no older than 8, asked if she could give him a ride home. Lisa said she felt a wave of unease, but couldn't figure out why. Then the boy leaned closer to the car, and she saw his eyes, completely black. Lisa said the fear hit her like a physical force. She muttered an excuse and sped off, her heart racing. When she glanced in the rearview mirror, the boy was standing in the middle of the road, watching her taillights disappear. What's fascinating about these encounters isn't just the details of the kids themselves, it's the way people describe their own reactions. Witnesses almost universally report an overwhelming sense of fear or dread, even before they notice the children's black eyes. It's as if their instincts are kicking in, warning them that something isn't right. One witness described it as a deep, bone-chilling terror, like the kind you feel in a nightmare when you realize you can't wake up. You know that feeling when you're home alone and you hear a noise you can't explain? That little moment of panic where your heart skips a beat? Now multiply that by 10, and you're getting close to what these people describe. It's not just fear, it's a visceral, almost primal reaction, as if every fiber of their being is screaming, "Run!" Despite the variety of settings, porches, cars, remote roads, there are some common threads that run through nearly every BEK encounter. For starters, the children always seem to need permission to enter. They'll ask to come in, to use a phone, get a drink of water, or wait for a ride. But they never explain why they're really there. It's this insistence that unnerves people, like they're following some kind of rule that can't be broken. And then there's their monotone speech and strange, stiff mannerisms. Witnesses often describe the kids as being off in ways they can't quite put their finger on, like actors trying to mimic human behavior but missing the mark. It's almost as if they're not kids at all, but something else wearing the guise of children, something that doesn't quite understand how people are supposed to act. Honestly, if a kid shows up at my door and doesn't immediately ask for Wi-Fi or mention Minecraft, I'm already suspicious. But if their eyes are black voids and they insist on coming inside, yeah, that's a hard no. The consistency in these accounts is what makes the black-eyed kids so unsettling. They follow a pattern, always showing up unannounced, always needing permission to come in, and always leaving behind a trail of fear. Whether they're supernatural beings, alien hybrids, or just the creepiest pranksters of all time, one thing's for sure. If you ever hear that knock on your door, maybe think twice before you answer. When it comes to the black-eyed kids, the real question isn't just what they are, it's why they exist. Over the years, countless theories have emerged, each trying to explain the unsettling nature of these encounters. Are they supernatural beings, extraterrestrial hybrids, or simply the product of overactive imaginations? Let's explore the possibilities, one eerie step at a time. One of the most popular theories about the black-eyed kids is that they're supernatural beings, possibly vampires, demons, or even interdimensional entities. If you think about it, there are striking similarities between BEK encounters and classic vampire lore. In almost every story, the children insist on being invited in before they can enter a home, a car, or even a conversation. This mirrors the age-old vampire rule. They can't cross your threshold without your explicit permission. It's a fascinating parallel, and it makes you wonder, are the black-eyed kids just a modern twist on an ancient fear? Demons are another possibility that gets tossed around. Their black, soulless eyes certainly fit the description of something unholy, and many witnesses report feeling a wave of intense dread or unease in their presence. Some believe this reaction is our primal instinct kicking in, a natural warning system that tells us when we're in the presence of something dangerous or evil. And then there's the theory that these kids aren't from this dimension at all. What if they're interdimensional travelers slipping into our world by mistake, or worse, on purpose? It's a chilling thought, isn't it? That these beings might exist just beyond the veil, stepping through when we least expect it. Of course, if they are interdimensional, I'd love to know who's in charge of their wardrobe choices. Those outdated hoodies and jeans, definitely not winning any style points. And then we have the extraterrestrial theory. Some researchers believe the black-eyed kids could be alien-human hybrids sent to Earth for reasons we can only speculate about. The idea isn't as far-fetched as it sounds when you consider the descriptions of their appearance. Those black eyes, strikingly similar to the grays often reported in UFO encounters. Their monotone speech and awkward mannerisms, also eerily reminiscent of alien depictions in pop culture. If we follow this line of thinking, the BEKs might be part of some kind of experiment testing how well they can blend into human society. And let's be honest, they're not doing a great job of it. If the goal was to pass as normal kids, and maybe someone should have told them that staring blankly and demanding to be let inside isn't the way to do it. But jokes aside, the alien hybrid theory raises some fascinating questions. If these kids are extraterrestrial, why are they here? Are they observing us, interacting with us, or are they simply lost, caught between two worlds? Of course, not every theory involves the supernatural or extraterrestrial. Some skeptics argue that BEK stories could be explained by psychological phenomena like the sleep paralysis. This condition, which causes people to feel paralyzed while they're half awake, is often accompanied by vivid hallucinations. Could the black-eyed kids be a product of these episodes, their eerie details drawn from the depths of our subconscious fears? Another possibility is mass hysteria. Once a story like this takes off, especially in the age of the internet, it's easy for people to start seeing connections where there might not be any. Strange knock at the door, a kid acting a little weird. Suddenly, it all feels like part of the same legend. And then there's the simplest explanation of all: hoaxes. Could some of these encounters be nothing more than elaborate pranks? Maybe kids messing with people for fun? It's not out of the question, though I'd like to think the average prankster doesn't have access to jet black contact lenses and a flair for the theatrical. Honestly, if some of these stories are pranks, I hope those kids have backup plans for when they try this on the wrong house and end up getting chased off by a very confused but very determined homeowner. But here's the thing. Even if some of these stories are exaggerated or fabricated, that doesn't explain why the black-eyed kids resonate so deeply with people. Like Slender Man or Shadow People, BEKs have become part of modern mythology, thriving in the digital age. Their simplicity makes them adaptable to any setting: a knock on a door, a figure on the roadside, a pale child staring at you from the edge of the woods, and it's a template for fear, one that fits neatly into our modern lives. Maybe that's why the black-eyed kids have endured. They play on universal fears: strangers, the uncanny, and the loss of control in our own homes. And in a world where everything feels explainable, stories like these remind us that some mysteries still defy reason. They keep us looking over our shoulders, questioning what might be out there, and just maybe making sure we never ignore a knock at the door again. The Black-Eyed Kids may have started as a chilling story shared in the early days of the internet, but they've since grown into something much bigger, a cultural phenomenon that has seeped into modern media, online storytelling, and even our collective fears. Over the years, these eerie, pale children with their pitch-black eyes have become a staple of the horror genre, shaping how we tell stories about the unknown. Let's start with how the Black-Eyed Kids have found their way into movies, TV shows, and literature. One of the most recognizable depictions is in the long-running series Supernatural. While the show didn't explicitly name them as Black-Eyed Kids, certain episodes featured children or creatures posing as children that bore striking similarities to the BEK legend. Pale, emotionless, and undeniably creepy, these characters felt like a nod to the stories that have haunted the internet for years. The indie horror scene has also embraced the BEKs, with films like Let Me In and Whispering Corridors drawing on the unsettling imagery of children who are far from innocent. Even in literature, authors have used the Black-Eyed Kids as a modern twist on age-old fears. They've appeared in horror anthologies and novels where they serve as the perfect antagonist, unsettling, enigmatic, and impossible to pin down. I mean, let's be honest, creepy kids are practically the MVPs of horror. Whether it's the twins from The Shining or the boy from The Omen, there's just something inherently unsettling about children who aren't quite right. And when you throw in jet black eyes, forget it, that's nightmare fuel for days. But if there's one place where the Black-Eyed Kids really thrive, it's the internet. Platforms like Reddit, especially the no-sleep forum, have become a breeding ground for new BEK stories. If you're not familiar with No Sleep, it's a space where users share fictional horror stories, written as though they're real. It's the perfect venue for the Black-Eyed Kids, a legend that blurs the line between fact and fiction. Stories posted there often follow the same eerie formula: a knock at the door, an overwhelming sense of dread, and the chilling realization that these aren't ordinary kids. Creepypasta websites have also played a huge role in keeping the legend alive. For those of you who don't know, creepypasta is essentially internet folklore. Short horror stories that are shared, adapted, and spread like digital campfire tales. The Black-Eyed Kids fit seamlessly into this tradition with their simple yet terrifying premise. The best part, or worst, depending on how easily you scare, is that these stories are written to feel authentic, making you wonder, could this actually happen? And if you've ever gone down a rabbit hole of BEK stories late at night, you know exactly what I mean. One minute you're casually scrolling, the next you're double-checking the locks on your doors and maybe keeping the lights on just in case. So why do the Black-Eyed Kids resonate so deeply with us? What is it about their image that strikes such a universal chord of fear? Part of it, I think, lies in their uncanny nature. Children are supposed to be symbols of innocence, joy, and trust. But when that image is distorted, when they're pale, emotionless, and staring at you with black, soulless eyes, it's deeply unsettling. It's like our brain doesn't know how to process what it's seeing, and that creates a visceral, almost primal fear. There's also something about the way they disrupt the comfort of everyday life. A knock on the door, a stranger asking for help. These are ordinary situations we don't think twice about. But when it's a black-eyed kid on your doorstep, suddenly the mundane becomes terrifying. They challenge our sense of safety, turning our homes the places we feel most secure, into the setting for our worst nightmares. And maybe that's the genius of the BEK legend. It doesn't rely on complex backstories or elaborate setups. It's simple, relatable, and endlessly adaptable. Whether it's a suburban home, a lonely car on a dark road, or a chance encounter on the street, the black-eyed kids could show up anywhere. And that's what keeps us hooked. The possibility that they're out there waiting for the next unsuspecting person to open the door. From indie films to internet forums, from our darkest fears to our most curious questions, the black-eyed kids have left an indelible mark on modern culture. They're more than just a creepy story. They're a reminder of how the unknown can capture our imaginations, keep us looking over our shoulders, and maybe, just maybe, make us think twice before answering that knock at the door. As we've explored the strange and unsettling phenomenon of the black-eyed kids, one thing has become abundantly clear. These stories tap into some of our most primal fears. They go beyond the typical jump scare or creepy setting. Instead, they strike at the heart of what makes us feel safe and what happens when that safety is threatened. Think about it. Strangers knocking on your door late at night, it's already enough to make anyone uneasy. Add in the fact that these strangers are children, pale and emotionless, with jet black eyes staring back at you, and it's no wonder people describe their encounters as terrifying. The black-eyed kids take something we're wired to trust, children, and twist it into something unnatural and sinister. It's like our brains can't reconcile the contradiction, and that creates an almost instinctive sense of fear. But it's not just about the kids themselves. These encounters often happen in places we think of as safe. Our homes, our cars, the spaces where we feel most in control. The idea that something so unsettling could breach those boundaries, that fear could find its way to our doorstep, is what makes the BEK legend so powerful. It's not just a story about creepy kids, it's a story about losing control in the one place you're supposed to feel secure. And let's be honest, most of us aren't equipped to deal with a scenario like this. Sure, we've all watched horror movies and yelled at the characters for making bad decisions, but when it comes to hearing a knock at your door at midnight, how many of us are really brave enough to check it out? If it were me, I'd probably just pretend I wasn't home. Maybe throw a blanket over my head for good measure, because we all know blankets are the ultimate defense against supernatural entities. What would you do? But that's the real question, isn't it? What would you do if you were face to face with the black-eyed kids? Would you listen to that little voice in the back of your mind screaming, "Don't let them in"? Or would your curiosity get the better of you? It's easy to say you'd slam the door and walk away, but in the moment, with those black eyes staring back at you, would you really be able to? Take a moment to put yourself in the shoes of someone who's had this experience. Imagine the knock at the door, the quiet, insistent voices asking for help. Would you feel the overwhelming dread so many witnesses describe? Or would you chalk it up to overthinking and let them in just to be polite? And if you did, what would happen next? These are the kinds of questions that make the black-eyed kids legend so fascinating. They force us to confront not just our fears of the unknown, but our own instincts. Do we trust our gut when something feels wrong, or do we rationalize it away? And in the end, does it even matter? Because if the BEKs are real, and I'm not saying they are, but I'm not saying they're not, sometimes trusting your instincts might be the only thing standing between you and something you'll never forget. So next time you hear a knock at your door after dark, maybe just pretend you're not home. Worst case scenario, it's your neighbor wondering if they can borrow some sugar. Best case scenario, you've just avoided an encounter with the black-eyed kids. Either way, you're probably better off staying on the safe side. And so, we've come to the end of another journey into the strange and unsettling. Tonight, we explored the mystery of the black-eyed kids, those eerie, pale children who seem to appear out of nowhere, bringing with them an overwhelming sense of dread and 1,000 unanswered questions. From their chilling origins with Brian Bethel's account to the countless encounters shared across the internet, the BEK phenomenon has captured our imaginations and tapped into our deepest fears. We talked about the theories. Are they supernatural beings, alien hybrids, or perhaps something else entirely? And then there's the cultural impact. How these stories have spread through movies, TV, and online spaces, cementing the black-eyed kids as modern urban legends. But maybe the most fascinating part of all is the way these stories make us reflect on our own instincts, our fears, and what we'd do if faced with the unknown. It's a lot to unpack, isn't it? I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for joining me tonight. Whether you're a longtime fan of legends and lore, or you just stumbled upon this episode because you've been Googling creepy kids, I'm so glad you're here. This podcast wouldn't be what it is without you. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you have your own theories about the black-eyed kids? Have you had an encounter you'd like to share? Or maybe you just want to tell me what you do if you heard that knock on your door. Whatever it is, drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you. Now, if the black-eyed kids weren't enough to give you the chills, you're going to want to tune in next week. We're heading to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to explore one of the most famous cryptids of all time, the Mothman. From eerie sightings of a winged figure to the tragic collapse of the Silver Bridge, we'll dive into the mysteries, the warnings, and the legacy of the Mothman prophecies. It's a story that's part folklore, part tragedy, and entirely fascinating. So, if you're like me and think giant, glowing-eyed moth creatures are the perfect follow-up to creepy kids with black eyes, make sure you don't miss it, and maybe keep a flashlight handy, just in case. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest mysteries aren't lurking out there in the dark. Sometimes they're the ones that come knocking on your door. And this has been Legends and Lore, and I'm your host, David Culpepper. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.